Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton went wheel to wheel at the Mexico Grand Prix, literally into turn one, and that was the start of what ended up being a manic couple of corners, which ended up in Lewis Hamilton receiving a 10-second time penalty for leaving the track and gaining a lasting advantage. However, this has caused once again a lot of discussion and uproar because many think that it was unjustified and that the actions before they even got to turn 4 meant that Max Verstappen should have ended up with the penalty, or at least with Lewis receiving nothing. Well, I have reviewed this incident and I think there's a couple of things here that people have failed to pick up on, and they're glaringly missing in the stewards' analysis of, one, what Max Verstappen actually did in this whole sequence of events, and two, the interpretation of the racing guidelines. So that's what we're going to do in this video, and well, the first place to start is of course what happened into turn 1. So turn 1, Max Verstappen comes from quite far back and starts this sequence of events with Lewis Hamilton. He makes a legitimate move down into turn 1, and Lewis Hamilton is aware of this and leaves him room, but Max Verstappen hits Lewis Hamilton wheel to wheel, forcing Lewis off the racing surface. All 4 of the Ferrari's wheels were outside the white line, while Max stays within track limits, and well, they very quickly move on to turn 2, but we're going to get to turn 2 in a short while because we need to assess turn 1 first, because many have stated, was that a clean move by Max Verstappen? If you bang wheels, make contact of any kind with the car that you're trying to overtake, can that be deemed a legitimate overtaking move? And was that in a controlled manner? And that now brings us to the first time we are going to refer to the driving standards guidelines. Now, the key here, guys, is that these are guidelines and not regulations, but this is the all-important document that the stewards and the drivers refer to in relation to what is acceptable for racing, whether you're on the inside, whether you're on the outside, chicanes, S-bends, etc. And as many kind of scenarios as possible for racing in F1 today. Now, the key thing here is that these are guidelines and not regulations, so they aren't mandatory. They are there to be referred to and to assist, but not necessarily are they completely binding. However, when we get into this, you will see that I think there's a few discrepancies here in the relation to the wording, whether that's by design or whether it's a mistake. I don't know. But firstly, you can see here that I've highlighted a couple of key passages, and you can see that the first one is that an overtaking driver has priority. It is the responsibility of the defending driver to avoid a collision or forcing off the overtaking driver. Now that is very, very prudent to this whole sequence of events with Lewis and Max Verstappen, and that right there, that little line, is the sole reason as to why Lewis Hamilton was investigated by the stewards for this turn 1 incident for not leaving sufficient racing room for Max Verstappen, rather than Max Verstappen being investigated here. So that line there is exactly why that stewards report came out and Lewis was the investigated driver. Mad, I know, but that is how the racing guidelines are written at the moment. Now, in my personal opinion, I think Lewis Hamilton left more than sufficient racing room for Max Verstappen on his inside there, and subsequently Lewis was not deemed at fault for this and the stewards agreed. However, the next one here which we need to refer to on this highlighted passage is point 2 of A, and that is overtaking on the inside of a corner. Now, the first instance here is where it says the car has to have its front axle at least alongside the mirror or the other car prior to and at the apex, which Max Verstappen did have. The second one is the key one here. Be driven in a fully controlled manner, particularly from entry to apex, and not have dived in. So, was Max Verstappen fully in control of his car from entry to apex? Not the exit, from entry to apex. So from his initial movement of pulling out from the slipstream of Lewis Hamilton's Ferrari, I would say yes. I would say that he has definitely he was in control of his car there. Yes, he was carrying more speed than previous laps because he was in the slipstream DRS open and he was going for a move. Now, did he dive in? I don't think he dived in. Now, of course, dived in is up for interpretation. What is the actual definition of dived in? That isn't defined in the driving guidelines, and maybe that's something that needs to be defined, as well as what is deemed to be fully in control of your car. I think there's a couple of words in here that personally needs defining, but I would say he hasn't dived in. Lewis was fully aware of the move. It was controlled. It was a controlled move under braking, and yeah, he was in control of that car from entry to apex. But what about the exit? Because Max arguably lost control of his Red Bull there. That's where the argument is. He made contact with Lewis Hamilton and forced the car off of the track, and arguably used the Ferrari as a bump stop. Would Max have even been able to have kept his car within track limits without Lewis's Ferrari being there? We will never know. However, I do think there's a fair argument to be had that if you are unable to avoid contact with the car you're trying to overtake, well, particularly from a move like this in the nature of this corner, I think you could say he was not in control of his car. Now, move down to point B2, the other highlighted element here, and it mentions overtaking on the outside of a corner. And it says, point 2, be driven in a controlled manner from entry to apex, so the same as point A2 when you're on the inside. But the key thing here at the end is it says, and to exit. So if you're overtaking on the outside, you need to be in control of your car from entry to apex and to the exit of the corner. Now, I don't know if this is by design or if this is just an oversight. Why does it not say and to exit when you are overtaking on the inside of the corner? That is definitely up for interpretation, and a steward could say that, well, really, it doesn't matter if you're in control of your car and you're overtaking on the inside. As long as you're ahead at the apex, you can do what you want. The inside car has the remit to do what they want, and it is the responsibility of the outside car to get out of the inside car's way, as long as they are able to keep that car within track limits. And yeah, that is it. That seems wrong in my personal opinion, and I think that needs to be defined. And if I was a driver in F1, I would be saying that, hang on a second, while it's not necessarily my job to go through all of the regulations and look at clauses and so forth in F1, these are important racing rules. This is what people have argued Max knows better than anyone else on the grid. And potentially he does, because technically he wasn't in control of his car on the apex to the exit of the corner, but because he was on the inside, and that 8.2 clause there doesn't have and to exit, he can be out of control of his car, because he actually on the apex itself covers the curb, and when you slow that footage down, he loses a bit of control with his car. And at the speeds that they're carrying at that moment, that all-important lack of control that he has, as you can see in the steering, with the car grounding out there, is pretty much what I believe, and under my assessment, made him travel into the side of Lewis's Ferrari and forcing him off the track and made contact with him. And I think if you make contact in this particular scenario here, I don't think that you're in control of your car. So that is something that I think Max has got away with. However, when you look at turn 2, which came up instantly because it is a very, very short run, that is a whole kind of different scenario and a whole different interpretation of these racing rules. And it's something that I think the stewards have glaringly omitted, whether by choice or by ignorance and incompetence, because we need to dive into that straight away. So turn 2 is immediately upon the drivers once they exit turn 1. No time to think here. And as we pick it up, Lewis Hamilton is off the racing surface right now. He's been forced off the track by Max Verstappen as per ahead of the Apex rules and the driving standards guidelines. He has won that corner. He is now ahead of Lewis. He has gained that position. But Lewis has not taken to the grass and cut the chicane like his teammate did in a similar scenario at turn 1 at the start of the race. No, he has decided to rejoin the racing surface because there is room to do so. And, well, Max is now ahead. Max has gained that position, and Max has now become the defending car. This is key here. Max is the defending car, and Lewis is the overtaking car. Now, Lewis gets his car back on track before they get to turn 2, and he has his car sufficiently alongside Max Verstappen. Point A1 states that you have to have, if you're the overtaking car on the inside, you have to have your front axle at least alongside the mirror of the other car prior to and at the apex. He's done that. You can see that from clear footage. And Max Verstappen, because it's such a tight angle there, and because of Max, of course, has already carried a lot of speed through there. He's already wide into turn 1. Anyway, they're very acute into that angle, and only one car is ever really making it through turn 2 there on track. So Max takes to the grass and cuts the chicane through turn 3. He has left the track, and well, this is where we then have to refer back to the racing guidelines, because personally, as we've just mentioned with point A1, Lewis Hamilton is ahead at the apex. It is his corner. He has that power. He has the right to drive the outside car off of the racing surface. That is what he is allowed to do. But did the stewards believe that Lewis Hamilton had become the overtaking car into turn 2? Or was he still defending his position, even though he technically has lost the corner and the overall position out of turn 1? This brings us back to the racing guidelines, where it says, point F, giving back a lasting advantage. Note, if while defending a position, a car leaves the track or cuts a chicane and rejoins in the same position, it will generally be considered by the stewards as having gained a lasting advantage. And therefore, generally, the position should be given back, as prescribed in the rules. It will be the sole discretion of the stewards to determine if the driver of a car is defending a position. That last line there in particular, the sole discretion of the stewards to determine if the driver of a car is defending a position, makes me believe, as I've touched on already, that it's either ignorance to the actual sequence of events itself, or this particular moment in this sequence of events, or of Lewis Hamilton's position, where it's a misinterpretation that he became the overtaking car into turn 2, and that he was still the defending car and Max was actually the overtaking car, which is in conflict of their own ruling of the turn 1 incidents, because Lewis Hamilton was investigated because he was the outside car, the defending car, as we've already touched upon, and it's his responsibility to move out of the way of Max Verstappen, who now has owned that corner, won the right to that position, as he has done, and is now ahead. While the next corner approaches very quickly and is upon them almost instantly, there has to be a line drawn somewhere as to where that whole moment has ended. Now, there is only one way that I can see the stewards have seen this as not being actionable on Max Verstappen's behalf, as gaining a lasting advantage, is point C, where it says chicanes and S-bends. It states the above guides for inside and outside may apply for each element of the combination, so point A and B are relative here, but the last line does say generally priority will be given to the first corner element. So that would mean, in this effect, the stewards, have they seen that turn 1, 2 and 3 is one whole chicane, one sequence of chicanes, and because of their ruling at turn 1, that takes priority, and that Lewis isn't actually the overtaking car into turn 2, and Max isn't the defending car there. I personally don't see it that way. I think turn 1 is its own corner, its own thing. I think there is enough, while it's not long. I do think that turn 2 and 3, there's a sufficient enough track distance from the exit of turn 1 to turn 2 that turn 2 and 3 is its own chicane, and turn 1 is its own corner element. That's my personal viewpoint. I don't know if the stewards have interpreted it differently. However, there is no ruling at all on the turn 2 element, or no mention anywhere of this corner cutting of Max Verstappen through turn 2, turn 3. And I also think as well that if that is the case, then Lewis Hamilton, in effect, is still run another driver off of the racing surface, and he should be deemed to be given a 10-second time penalty for it. So I do just believe, more and more that I've got into this, that the stewards just forgot about this and just chose to ignore it. They got so wrapped up in turn 1 and actually turn 4, what happened there, that they completely forgot about turn 2 and turn 3, but that it had, unfortunately, it had a massive impact into what eventually happened in turn 4. So I don't think you can assess turn 4 without actually taking in the context of what happened at turn 2 and 3, if you get my understanding. It's just absolutely bizarre, because Max Verstappen 100% gains a lasting advantage, because he defends his position down into turn 4. He has the DRS open. That is not a driver who is looking to give a position back to Lewis Hamilton. And well, that now brings us on to the whole debacle of turn 4, and why I do think Lewis Hamilton was unfairly given a 10-second time penalty, and why there was a couple of important factors here that were missed by the stewards when giving out this ruling. So the first thing to note on this run down to turn 4 is that Max is down on considerable speed here. He has just cut the corner of turn 3, and well, Lewis Hamilton, while it wasn't the best line through there, because of course he had to rejoin to take the turn 2 corner, he still has a much better exit than Max, and Max has to use his DRS, which he has a double dosing of, because it is double DRS down the start finish straight, and then the run down to turn 4. He uses that to ensure that he can try and maximize as much speed as possible heading into turn 4. Lewis in the slipstream looks to get past Max Verstappen, but he has to be careful about the Mercedes of George Russell, who is flying up behind him, because he's just been taking the racing line and he has caught up to these two. Now, something which unfortunately has exasperated even this top speed differential right now into turn 4 for Max is that his battery goes into derate. It means it stopped deploying, and you can see that by the red flashing lights on the rear of the Red Bull car from the onboard of George Russell. Now, there is one other thing that I just want to pick up on before we get to that important moment of the turn 4 exit, because Max Verstappen moved under braking into turn 4. Yes, he did. What am I going on about, Stuffeyy? Well, it's very easy to miss when you watch the TV footage. It's very easy to miss, but it's very noticeable when you know what you're looking for once you've seen the onboard footage, because when you watch the onboard footage, you can clearly see that Max jinks in the braking zone a move of his steering wheel to the right that takes his Red Bull very evidently closer to that of the Ferrari of Lewis Hamilton. Now, I think this inadvertently has helped contribute to the lockup of Lewis Hamilton into the braking zone there. There's two reasons for the lockup for Lewis Hamilton, of course, but that's one of them, I believe. We know these cars are super sensitive to the air, the dirty air, the aero package is so efficient now in the last year of this regulation set. And even a slight move like that takes him even half a metre, fraction of a metre closer to that of another car can disrupt the airflow quite a bit, considering Lewis is heading into a clear passage in front of him, clear air ahead of him. But there's still, of course, dirty air being thrown off to the side of that Red Bull. Now, I don't think this is Max's intention at all. I think he's just trying to maximise his entry into turn 4 because he's already on an acute line heading into that corner. However, I've never been a fan of this moving under braking, the jinking in particular, because that's what it is. And look, has it put Lewis Hamilton off? I don't know. I think it has had a contributing factor, as I just said, but only Lewis will be able to tell you from a driver's perspective as to whether or not it did. But I know I hate it on the simulator, and I can only imagine what it's like behind the wheel of an F1 car. It's got to be super off-putting, especially at the speeds that they're travelling at. So, what was the other contributing factor to Lewis Hamilton locking up into turn 4? Well, many will say it is the excess amount of speed, which normally you would say is the case. And I'm not going to sit here and deny that Lewis wasn't carrying more speed than he had done in previous laps. To be honest, there isn't really a fair comparison to the prior laps for Lewis Hamilton with this amount of fuel load, etc., and being in this exact scenario heading into this corner, because he was doing lift and coast from lap 3, as the Ferrari likes to tend to do. So the data does indicate that he was always braking, actually a bit later than even where he was here, his initial braking zone. But that's because he was lifting a lot sooner and carrying less speed so he can brake later. But he was carrying significant more speed in this exact moment than he was at pretty much any other time in the race. So that does have, of course, an influence. However, the main contributing factor here is Max Verstappen. And it's Max Verstappen, as he does, as we've already touched upon, is how perfect he is, although in this instance he wasn't perfect, in rolling off the brakes to ensure that he stays sufficiently ahead into the apex of turn 4. Now, this right here, this moment is exactly what the stewards, I believe, have missed or chosen to ignore in this right scenario, and what many analysis has ignored as well. Because while Max Verstappen rolls off of the brakes, and unfortunately, when it comes to telemetry data, we don't get the amount of force that is actually applied in the brake. It is either a full-on or off. It's on or off. It's 100% or 0%. So we don't get to know if they're trail braking, which 100% through certain corners, they are 100% trail braking throughout the race. So that means that they don't have 100% of the brake pressure applied. They have maybe 75 to 60%, sometimes even less. There's still an element of brake pressure being applied. And when we mean roll off of the brakes, it means exactly that, is that they've gone from a hard braking at 100% to releasing the brakes, not fully, but somewhat a good amount. And it means that obviously you're then allowing more speed of the car, more travel of the car than you necessarily would normally. And this is what Max has pretty much almost perfected, because he does this and he hits his normal braking marker, sees that the car on the outside is got some speed alongside him. The most recent prior to this was in a similar scenario was Circuit of the Americas last season, where Max defended from Lando on the inside. Lando had the overlap, was going around the outside, but Max rolled off of the brakes. Now, if you remember rightly, Lando Norris got a penalty for that because he gained a lasting advantage by overtaking Max off of the track. However, what Max did, as he did in exactly this scenario here, which has been ignored, missed, I don't know, only the stewards will be able to tell us, is that Max, as the defending car, just like he was at Circuit of the Americas, he was unable to keep his car within track limits. He made a defensive move to an overtaking car who arguably he has forced wide, because he has been unable to keep his car within track limits. He has carried too much speed on the exit of the corner, and while he is the inside car, he has ended up driving a car off track. And well, if we go back to the driving standard guidelines and refer to this from that very first sentence that I highlighted in the second paragraph, that an overtaking driver has the priority. It is the responsibility of the defending driver to avoid a collision or forcing off the overtaking driver. And well, what Max Verstappen has done is that he has forced another driver off track. While of course Lewis Hamilton has locked up, I think the stewards here have completely misinterpreted this whole sequence of events, particularly turn 4. They have missed that Max Verstappen has been unable to keep his car within track limits, and that him carrying too much speed into that corner has inadvertently caused Lewis Hamilton to lock up. And I don't know how they've been able to miss that. I don't know how they've been able to miss it. Now, if we refer back down to item F in the driving standard guidelines, it also says that if, while defending a position, a car leaves the track and rejoins in the same position, it will generally be considered by the stewards as having gained a lasting advantage, and therefore, generally, the position should be given back. Now, Max Verstappen, in that moment, gained a lasting advantage because he has held on to that position from Lewis Hamilton, of course, until Lewis rejoins the circuit, but he only has one place to rejoin. And, of course, Max ends up losing out in this whole sequence of events from an on-track perspective because he loses a position to Ollie Behrman. So that in itself has not worked out well for Max Verstappen, but Lewis Hamilton should not have been penalised for being forced off of the track. If anything, Max Verstappen should have received a 10-second time penalty for forcing another car off of the circuit because he's been unable to keep his car within the white lines. And for those saying that Max was in control of his car and the cause of Lewis going on was because he locked up, well, Max also locked up as well, as is evident from this still image that you can see and have seen throughout this video, and from the onboard of George Russell as well. So let's go back finally to the FIA document again, which we showed you at the very start as the reason as to why the stewards imposed a 10-second time penalty to Lewis. The crux of it is they've said, given marshalling system data and video evidence, car 44 locked his brakes, left the track at turn 4, and, well, they make mention of him not being able to use the escape road, which is understandable because it's a ridiculous escape road anyway, but he cut the corner and gained a lasting advantage over car number 1, Verstappen, and failed to give the position back thereafter. Therefore, the penalty for leaving the track and gaining a lasting advantage is therefore imposed, which I think, given all of the evidence and the analysis that I have presented to you here in this video, I don't think that's justified whatsoever. Now, if you look at it from a purely time perspective on track and the data, yes, Lewis gains an advantage on Max because Max ends up losing out, battling with George into turn 5. He then loses out on a position to Ollie Behrman and goes side by side with him for multiple corners, while Lewis Hamilton, of course, has ended up with no cars to contend with. I don't think that's Lewis's fault, as for all the reasons we've just mentioned. For all of the reasons we just mentioned, and for what happened in turn 2 and turn 3, and the reason as to why Lewis even had to take to the grass in the first place through turn 4, and Max not being able to keep his car within track limits itself, I think, yeah, I think the overall decision should have just been they continue onwards. They continue onwards. And if anything, Max Verstappen receives a 10-second time penalty. I think personally, he should have received 2 10-second time penalties, just like he received last year in Mexico, which is doable. He received a 10-second time penalty at the exact same corner, turn 4, because he wasn't ahead at the apex and he forced another driver off of the racing circuit. That time, he was able to keep his car within track limits, but this time around, he wasn't even able to. Then, of course, a couple of corners later, the same corner, turn 7, I believe it is, where he went side by side with Ollie Behrman, he lunged his car in there and forced Lando off again. While, similarly, okay, in an overtaking position, not a defending position, like here in turn 4, and he received another 10-second time penalty. 2 10-second time penalties, 20 overall in the space of just a couple of corners on the same lap. I think in this instance, I think Max is very, very lucky, fortuitous to get away with no penalties at all. And I think, I'm going to say it, I think the main reason he has been given a lot of leeway here and maybe a blind eye has been turned is because Max Verstappen is fighting for this Drivers' World Championship. He is still within a chance. It is a big story at the moment. They want him involved. It means more eyes, it's better business, and I can't argue with that. And throughout history, many a driver world champion, many of those who are in competition for the title in any sport, they get the rub of the green when it comes to decisions, when it comes to refereeing decisions. And I think that is a great example here of what we saw. And you may call it cynical, but I think that is the truth, because we saw those penalties dished out last year, and I think this time around it was deserved as well. However, this time around it's against Lewis Hamilton. While he is a 7-time world champion, he isn't involved in a championship battle this year, so they can give a penalty to Lewis, and well, Max Verstappen can end up still continuing his challenge on the two McLarens. So that is my analysis as to why Lewis Hamilton's 10-second time penalty was completely unfair. Still baffles me that he was the only driver who ended up cutting the track and supposedly gained the lasting advantage and was penalised for it. But we've just proven, I think, enough in this video that he, as per all of the driving guidelines, driving standards that are available, that the stewards have clearly misinterpreted the racing rules there. I'd love to hear their explanations of that sequence as a whole, rather than just briefly about turn 1 and turn 4 in itself, which turn 4 doesn't even really go into that much detail, and there's clear evidence here that they've ignored, and it just shows incompetence. It shows incompetence, and possibly even just turning a blind eye, and it may be even a conscious decision to not penalise one of the title challengers for this season. Don't put it past them at the end of the day, because it is good for business if Max Verstappen is competing for this championship. Many want him to win. I personally want him involved as well, because it spices things up and it makes it more exciting for us as F1 fans. However, I want racing to be consistent with its application of the rules, and ultimately I hate these racing rules as they currently are. I hate the ahead at the apex rules. These drivers are, while we know it's not factually correct, but they are some of the best drivers in the world. They are 20 of some of the best drivers in the world, and they should be more than capable of going side by side with one another and leaving racing room, leaving an F1's car width to the outside. I don't think it is a difficult rule to apply. A lane system, don't move across into other people's lanes, and I think this ahead at the apex rule has got very messy, as I think we have just detailed here. So yeah, don't like it. It needs to be updated, and hopefully in 2026 moving forward they are updated and the drivers can get on board with something that they can all agree on, because this unfortunately removes us of any good wheel-to-wheel racing for multiple corners. That's what I want to see. I'm sure that's what you want to see, and it is most definitely what these drivers are capable of doing. But at the moment it's getting very messy like this, and we see corners, battles done by just a single corner rather than go on for long. Just because of the nature of this circuit with the chicanes and the runoff areas here, we was able to see this battle go on for at least the first sector, 4 corners or so, but if that was at any other circuit, it would have been over and done with by corner 1, because of Max having the right to do so, to shove the outside car off of the racing circuit. So yeah, it is what it is. We are where we are with F1, but I hope that between now and the end of the season we don't get any more incompetent stewarding like this. However, you probably just chuckled to yourself there, because it's most likely that we still will, with 4 race weekends remaining. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and we'll see you for the next one. Bye.